My name is Tim Gorshanes, and in this video, I'm going to talk about my paper, Information Needs and Practices Supported by ChatGPT. So you may remember that when ChatGPT came out in late 2022, right away, we saw all kinds of news items talking about ChatGPT as a Google killer. And as the years have gone on, other generative AI search products, such as Perplexity, have also joined the fight, as this headline from BBC says, the AI chatbot race. And in my world of information behavior and research on information seeking and how people are using technology to connect themselves with information, I was really interested in this whole phenomenon of generative AI as a search engine. And of course, also troubled by this phenomenon, but intellectually interested in how this is evolving and what people are actually doing with these products and how they're finding success or not with them. So I was thinking, generally along these lines of how is ChatGPT actually being used? Again, besides my research, my main world is teaching. And so the conversation has been totally enveloped by questions of cheating and academic dishonesty and so on, which is also very interesting, of course. But I was curious about everyday people outside of school contexts. How are people actually using ChatGPT? Why are they using it? Why do they go to ChatGPT and not other sources, for example? So I'm really interested in these kinds of questions. And just as a starting point for this project, I decided to frame this as the research question: what information needs and practices does ChatGPT support in practice? That is, like, in actual reality, not just in theory or possibility, but what are everyday people actually using this product for? And I decided to focus on ChatGPT specifically. As I mentioned, there are other products nowadays, but ChatGPT still has the largest market share. It still has that brand name recognition, like the Kleenex effect. So I really wanted to just frame this just in terms of ChatGPT. As I'll talk about later, there could be interesting follow-up research to do, comparing different use cases that predominate with different generative search platforms. But for now, ChatGPT. So to frame this in the literature a little bit, first we have this concept of information need. Basically, this is very simple, deceptively simple, this concept. At heart, it's what causes information seeking. So something that somebody feels, a discomfort or a kind of anxiety or a real life situation that's causing them, right, to need information. But once you really dig into this concept of information need, it gets really thorny. For example, how do you distinguish a need from a want? How do you distinguish an information need from a different kind of need, such as for food or hunger or transportation or whatever? Like, where's the line between information need, quote unquote, and like just a general human need? There's also issues of, like, can you call it a need if somebody doesn't know that they need it, right? If they, who are we to say what people need, right? It's kind of patronizing, right? So there's lots of literature, lots of questioning around this concept of information need. But just to kind of get us all on the same page with what I mean by the concept in this paper, I just wanted to bring out some summarizing work in this volume, Looking for Information, the classic literature review monograph on information behavior, information practices. In this work, Given and colleagues sort of frame three different types of information need literature. So on one hand, it can be a question that needs an answer. On another hand, it can be some kind of uncertainty that needs resolution. Maybe it doesn't quite bubble up into words, but it's just sort of a felt uncertainty. And then the third one is sense making. This is somebody in a lived situation going through a process of trying to get resolution, basically, on make things make sense, right? Make things come into coherence. So these three, I think typically we sort of go to the first one is kind of the default, because we're thinking in words, we're thinking in queries. But I'll come back to this in the discussion section, because I think looking at how people use ChatGPT for their informational needs sheds really interesting light on how we should be thinking about information need now and into the future. I also go through the literature, and this is super, super condensed, but if you're interested in the citations, definitely go to the full paper. I go through the literature on people's motivations and goals with using ChatGPT. I really try to limit myself to ChatGPT, again, for the reasons I talked about earlier. I can summarize this as there's key supporting factors and key detracting factors for ChatGPT use. Supporting factors are when people expect it to perform for the task in an efficient way, like more efficiently than not using ChatGPT. When people have expectations, positive expectations around ease of use and how much effort it would need to do the thing that they were trying to do. Again, kind of along the lines of efficiency. And then also the third huge category driver was social influence. So word of mouth and getting excited about other people showing how they use ChatGPT for such and such. On the other hand, detracting factors are when people discover that the output is inaccurate for a certain use case, or if they have trouble, like it gives them some output and it's not quite what they want, and they're kind of doing the prompt engineering, right? But they're having trouble making it do what they want. That can be a detracting factor. There's also a little bit more generalized ones, such as anxiety of new technology or not wanting to learn something new kind of thing. And then the last category is creepiness, especially due to the human-like qualities of using ChatGPT that just turns some people off. So going through this literature was really interesting. There is a lot of it. I'm sure there's now even more than when I did this paper. I had the submission deadline, so like February 2025. But this was all a little bit too general for what I was looking for with my research questions. I really want to know in the moment, in a specific instance, why is somebody going to ChatGPT and not some other source? So I did find some literature that helped frame this stuff a little bit. I found people in the documented literature, people using ChatGPT to come up with ideas, so as a brainstorming partner, or to take some input such as a letter or an email or whatever, and polishing it up a little bit, improving the tone, that kind of thing. Creating boilerplates, so a kind of communication you need to write a lot. You can use generative AI to create a sort of template that you can then use and customize yourself later on. And then there's another whole use case, which is really interesting, around just conversation. People just wanting to chat. People wanting to learn a new language, especially English, right, which is what ChatGPT is best suited for, or having a debate, right, these kinds of things. So this was a little bit more along the lines of what I was hoping to learn. And I thought that these results or these, sparse findings show a little bit more opportunity to systematize these use cases, right? Like right now, these are just sort of 4 random bullet points. How do they fit together? How they're related to each other? What different use cases are there out there? So what I did was a qualitative content analysis of ChatGPT usage vignettes that were shared by anonymous users on Reddit. So that's the study that I conducted. Reddit is a great place to conduct this kind of work because people anonymously share all kinds of very detailed things about their lives and their activities. In this case, I collected most of my data from the r/ChatGPT subreddit, which was where people share all kinds of things. I found lots of posts around people just asking like, so how are you all using ChatGPT in your everyday lives? And all kinds of people responded with very detailed things. So that was my primary source of data collection. I also found some things on the OpenAI subreddit and the OpenAI community forums that they host on their own website. Many of these were interlinked. These posts and comments were dated from 2023, so shortly after ChatGPT's release, to the current year, 2025. Again, I did this research in like February 2025, and in total, I collected 205 of these vignettes, and that's when I reached saturation, and I was just seeing, okay, we're getting the same thing. I'll talk about my analysis in a moment. But just as a little more detail on my inclusion and exclusion criteria for these vignettes, I only wanted to include vignettes in my data set that gave enough specificity to show how is somebody actually using ChatGPT, like what is their literal interaction. So for example, if somebody just wrote that I use ChatGPT to learn about politics, that doesn't tell us how they're actually learning about politics, right? Like, is it through role play, mock debate? Is it through giving me the history? Is it through spitballing policy ideas, right? It doesn't tell us how they're actually using ChatGPT. Versus on the other hand, if somebody said, oh, I'm using ChatGPT as like a journal for my symptoms for whatever disease and tracking it in connection to the things that I eat and my physical activity, right? That's specific enough to tell me, okay, this is how you're using ChatGPT. So what I did was I collected all these vignettes, 205 of them, and I went through multiple rounds of open coding to try and learn, again, why people are using ChatGPT and what are they doing with it. So I came up with 3 main analytical dimensions. That's domain. So what sort of life sphere is somebody using ChatGPT in, or in this vignette, I mean. ChatGPT role. So what is literally happening with ChatGPT? What role is ChatGPT playing? And then human need is like, what is behind the ChatGPT use? What is the person trying to accomplish? So you can see here a snippet of the spreadsheet that I created to do this work. And as I mentioned, it was iterative. So it went through many rounds of bringing these, the categories into conformity as you do with a content analysis. And then the next step is, once I was satisfied that all of this was sort of coherent and well done, I did affinity diagramming to map the relationships between the ChatGPT roles. So there was a number of different ChatGPT roles you can see in the third column in this spreadsheet snippet. And so I wanted to see, okay, how are these related to each other? What, logic is there between them? So that was the final step of the analysis, which I'll show in a couple of slides once I talk through some of the higher level findings. All right, so high level findings to start out with. Maybe not surprising, people are coming to ChatGPT with all kinds of information needs. This includes traditional ones, such as answering a question or filling a gap, like the reducing uncertainty, to other things like needing to create information, needing to evaluate information, needing to change information. These are really interesting, and they're not usually captured by how we talk about information need or have traditionally talked about it. There's also some, there was many cases going back to the literature review finding that people use ChatGPT just for conversation. This was an interesting one because there's a need for interaction that we can think of as an information need, not for any of the results or the content of the interaction per se, but just to talk to somebody, right? That was a need that kind of came through a lot. And since I did this research, this has come up in the news a lot of this phenomenon of like the AI boyfriend or AI girlfriend or AI, just companion in general, someone you can just talk to. So that's a really interesting thing that probably needs some more attention. Then I wanted to share the domain findings and human need findings and just how those broke down. Here's domain, first of all. So again, this is the life sphere in which people are using ChatGPT. As you can see, the largest categories are home and family, work, and then leisure activities like hobbies and so on. And then there's a bunch of smaller categories. But I was able to map all 205 vignettes into just these, how many are there? 8 different categories. So that was pretty interesting in itself. There is a range. It's predominantly those 3 that you see here, but it seems to be finite, the domains in which this is used. Next, human need. And the first thing that jumps out is that there's a huge other category. Besides the other category, I'll talk about that in a sec. The largest one was writing and editing. So, massaging text or coming up with text, that sort of thing. And learning a new language, for example, learning the name of something, learning about some concept, some scientific concept or historical thing or whatever, people use it for that. And then programming was another large one. And then friend, 3%, that one was the largest of the other, so to speak. Again, this need for conversation, this need to connect with somebody, even if it's a chatbot. So, but we have this huge other category. So this is just like the long tail of different human needs that are being satisfied by ChatGPT. Just to share a couple examples of what fell into this category. And usually these were like one-off, like there's just one example of each one. Having book club conversations with ChatGPT, developing ideas for a new business, building a computer, making a purchase decision, planning a road trip, translating text from English to Spanish, overcoming writer's block, self-reflecting on personal events, getting personal motivation. So there was a lot there. Maybe there's further theorization or that could happen with this specific one, because there is just this huge long tail. So that's a pretty interesting outcome from this work. Next, I'll share a little bit about the affinity diagramming process I wrote to digest the ChatGPT roles section of this work. So what I did was I wrote each ChatGPT role that came out onto a separate little digital Post-it note. And then I just visually tried to organize them. The ones that sort of had the most to do with each other were closer together, and the ones that were farther apart were farther from each other. And then I tried to organize these clusters and, make this whole thing sort of create a map. This is the affinity diagramming method if you're unfamiliar with that. So what you can see here are the rough results of what I came up with for that. And as you can see, the Post-it notes fell into a few different clusters. There's 6 of them. And I was trying to think through like, okay, what is the logic by which these are organized? And I kind of came up with this 2-axis structure of the vertical axis you can see is going from creating to responding. So when AI provides most of the content, that's called creating, or when the user provides most of the content and the AI is just riffing on it, that's called responding. And then the other axis is analytical to social. So things that are more kind of intellectual or logical, left brain, if you will, to social, things that are more relational, conversational, that kind of thing. So all the way at one end critiquing, all the way at the other end talking. I cleaned this up a little bit, and this is the figure that you see in the full paper. Again, it's all the same information, it's just a little bit more easy to read and a little bit more polished looking. But yeah, I think this is really interesting. We see these 6 main information practices that are supported by ChatGPT. By using that term information practices, I'm referring to kind of repeated structures of tasks or activities that are happening again and again that have this kind of like, practice. Like it's repeated. It's not necessarily habitual, but something that a person would do over and over. And so people are using ChatGPT for again, writing is a huge one. Ones that don't get talked about too much. Identifying, that was a really interesting practice. Is describing something to ChatGPT and asking the name of it, for example, or answering questions or explaining a concept. Helping decide, right, where should I go or what should I do in this situation. The other ones I think are pretty commonly known, but I would just emphasize again at the all the way to the right there, the talking category. People are just using ChatGPT as a conversational partner, and so this is an information product. It's used as a portal to the world's information, and talking is a huge need that people are bringing to it. So my takeaways from this study are one is helping think through this notion of information need. So on this slide, I just sort of spelled out my thinking a little bit. Classic notions of information need align with classic notions of information as something primarily intellectual. But over the recent decades, we have new understandings of information, for example, as something corporeal, as something sense-based, right? And so new understandings of information in this sense suggest that a new notion of information need is going to be necessary. My work in this study shows ChatGPT usage as responding to an embodied information need to cope with the world. And this notion of coping is central to phenomenology. And it's all about just being a human. You're trying to accomplish your goals and stay alive and all these kinds of things. And we're just sort of responding to interpretatively to what the world is giving us. And so I think it's really fruitful to think of information need in this way. Thinking of information need in this way can help us think not just in terms of discrete moments of information seeking and where people are going, but how information fits into a person's life. And again, I'm thinking primarily here about this need to talk, where it's not about trying to get information. It's just about trying to get the activity of getting information, which is kind of a new way of thinking about things, I think. There's lots of avenues for future work, and I hope you already have some ideas of your own as I've been talking. I see some immediate empirical things that we could do by using a broader data set to possibly capture more, or a more recent data set, given how fast these things are changing the technology and new capabilities that are becoming possible. As I mentioned early on, there's other generative AI tools, and just anecdotally, I hear that people are using different ones in different ways. So people might go to this, Claude for some specific thing. They might go to Perplexity for this and ChatGPT for this. So it would be interesting to disentangle that a little bit more. And then this past summer, so summer 2025, the AI companies like OpenAI, for example, have released some reports on how people are using their products, which is sort of similar in spirit to my research questions in this paper. I did not do a full analysis of how those map or relate, but there does seem to be some resonances there. So I think there's opportunities to formalize that work through triangulation. There's also some theoretical things that we could do to build on this work. So for example, not just talking about typologies of information, behavior, or practices, but thinking through the process model. Like there's some really wonderful theoretical process models for information seeking and information use. And I wonder how these AI tools fit into those or challenge them or extend them, that sort of thing. And then as I was getting at on the previous slide, we can think a little bit more deeply about information need and bring this into conversation with other framings, other approaches to information phenomena, such as information experience. So So that's all I wanted to share with you today. I hope it was interesting to learn about how people are using ChatGPT and how we can think about this systematically with the lens of information need and information practices, which I think our field is really well suited to do. I would love it if you reached out with any comments or questions. You can see my email here on the slide. It's just my last name @drexel.edu. Thank you so much for your attention.